Hidden traumas are those things that I respond to every day. I've reenacted. I don't even understand that I've created a life that reenacts what's going on because I'm trying to master the thing I couldn't back then. And so our behaviors, our beliefs, the way that we respond, our relationships suffer from these events that happened or these responses that we keep with us that we don't even understand are part of who we've become because of the things that happened.
Welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober. I'm your host, Tim Westbrook, and today we have a very special guest joining us, Terra Holbrook. Terra is the founder of TerraVista Retreats in Idaho, a unique healing space dedicated to helping individuals recover from trauma, addiction, and other life challenges. With over 2 decades of experience as a therapist, Terra specializes in trauma-informed care, and her work is centered on guiding people through the often hidden layers of trauma that can impact every aspect of their lives. In today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the concept of hidden trauma, what it is, how it manifests, and the ways it can be addressed and healed. Terra brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this subject, and I'm excited for her to share her insights with all of you. Terra, welcome. I'm so grateful to have you here.
Thank you, Tim. I'm really excited to be here. We've planned on doing this for a while, and I'm so thrilled that we made this work. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here.
So am I. I think the timing was perfect.
I do too. Yeah.
And we scheduled and we canceled a few times. And just truth be told, I went through Terra's program, TerraVista Retreats. My experience was profound. I walked away with so much, and even just thinking about it almost brings me to tears.
Mm.
So
yeah. I honor that process, and I'm excited to share what I do and the impact it had on you, and just really talk about this beautiful work that really both of us are engaged in, and just excited to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be great. And I'm, I think that I was thinking about it this morning. I've got a bunch of questions here about trauma and hidden trauma and your process and so forth. And then I also was just thinking about how talking about my experience is probably going to be one of the best ways, if not the best way, to really showcase, or not showcase, I don't know if that's the right word, but kind of show people what, the type of work that you do and what can happen as a result of uncovering some of this hidden trauma. So
yeah. And I'm excited to, you don't get to sit on this side of the seat really very often and hear somebody talk about your work. And so, it'll be a great time to sit and listen to your experience, and then share my experience on the other side of how we did this. Yeah.
Yeah. So Terra, could you start by giving us a brief overview of your background and what led you to found TerraVista Retreats?
I started working in the drug and alcohol treatment field in 1994, 1995. I had a CSAT I had a KDAC, and really just started off. I wasn't in recovery. I was married to Jeff Holbrook, and he was doing work, and I just kind of tagged along with him a little bit and really got involved in understanding addiction and loved it. And we opened up our own outpatient treatment center a few years later. I went back to school and got my master's degree to do the clinical work, and so I stayed in the substance use disorder field for quite a long time. And then 2011, I started working for the Bridge to Recovery, and really began to understand, in those days, we talked a lot about codependency. The Bridge was known for codependency. But after opening up the program in Santa Barbara and really understanding codependency and anxiety, substance use, all of that, I really began to understand that the core of everything that we're talking about is trauma. And so, I worked with the Bridge for many, many years, and then because I never did live in Bowling Green, Kentucky, although I was in Santa Barbara for a period of time and that program closed down. I got tired of traveling to Bowling Green, Kentucky to do the professionals program. I facilitated that program and loved it for a long time, but the travel was difficult. And so in 2017, I was living on the coast of Oregon, and I came up with this idea that maybe people want to do their trauma work in an intensive setting. And so it was kind of a harebrained idea that maybe people would fly to the coast, drive
Right.
2 hours from Portland Airport. And I'll tell you what, people lined up to work for 2.5 days on their own,
Hmm.
just in one-on-one therapy for 2.5 days in this intensive kind of thing that I came up with. And when I had the opportunity to move to Boise, Idaho in 2018, my mom was here and I started taking care of her. The airport was 10 minutes away.
Hmm.
And it was a lot easier for people to come to Boise and stay and do the work. But I found myself booked for months in advance, and people that are wanting to do trauma work don't want to wait.
Right.
And so I've been doing some retreats. I've been doing some for first responders work and also some retreats. And so in 2020, or 2022, excuse me, just as we were kind of moving through COVID, I had thought about opening up a retreat center, but I had to make it through COVID before we really
Mhm.
did that. And a property came open, and I mean, it was seamless. It's God's work. So it was seamless. And we had found this really beautiful place in the country outside of Boise. And the rest is history. We've just been doing 2 retreats every month, the men's retreat and women's retreat. And it's just an amazing, beautiful part of my life and calling and what I've been, called to do. Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's beautiful. And everyone experiences trauma.
Everyone experiences trauma.
Everyone. And whether you call it little T or big T, somewhere in between, everybody experiences trauma from a very young age. And like, Gabor Mate and many other people say that trauma is at the root of all addiction.
I believe that because, to me, trauma isn't an event. And I think that's how people start defining, do I have trauma or do I not? They start looking for events.
Hmm.
And yeah, it can be one event, or it can be small events over time, but it isn't the thing that happens, because oftentimes one person's trauma doesn't register as another person's trauma.
Right.
It's really what happens to us after the event that our body freezes in a state of fear, pain, dysregulation, and then what we do afterwards to compensate for not being able to come to some resolution about the thing or things that happened to us.
Now, you talk about hidden trauma. What is hidden trauma and how does it differ from overt or more obvious forms of trauma?
Yeah, I think when we talk about trauma in general, people really resonate with the idea of shock trauma, meaning an event that happened. I had these responses. I've either recovered or I haven't, but it comes from this event. Hidden traumas are those things that I respond to every day. I've reenacted. I don't even understand that I've created a life that reenacts what's going on because I'm trying to master the thing I couldn't back then. And so our behaviors, our beliefs, the way that we respond, our relationships suffer from these events that happened or these responses that we keep with us that we don't even understand are part of who we've become because of the things that happened that we haven't resolved. And so from that, we don't have a sense of safety. Trauma is about a stripping of safety. And so when we don't have that safety, we respond in ways that we don't even understand in trying to get safe, keep ourselves safe, reestablish safety. And it can wreak havoc on our lives. But again, it's hidden because we don't understand all that's happening to us.
Can you share an example of how hidden trauma might manifest in a person's life without them even realizing it?
Oh yeah, I've got a great example. It just came to me when you said that. Jeff and I were married for probably I don't know, 10 years, 15 years maybe. And one day, and he traveled a lot. And one day he said to me, do you realize you pick a fight every single time I leave to go on a trip? And I was like, what are you talking about? You're ADD, you stir up the household, you blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I thought about it. And my dad had died when I was 17 on a business trip. And I had to really take a look at what happened. What did I do every time Jeff left? What was my response to him leaving? And I could feel that energy, whether it was anxiety, whether it was grief that I hadn't ever really resolved. Whatever it was discomfort. And whatever it was, it had come up in a way to push him away because I didn't know how to deal with the pain of it all. I would push him away through some smart aleck thing that I would say, or some blaming thing that I would do to push him away a little further. So I didn't have to feel the absence of his leaving.
Right.
'Cause I experienced that a long time ago and never had opened the door to really take a look at that. And so to me, that's a hidden trauma. I didn't understand what I had put in place to protect from a feeling of long ago that wasn't resolved.
Yeah, that's a great example. It's like you don't realize that you have this behavior that is a result of this trauma from when you were younger.
Right, right. And we all have it. We
Right.
all have it in ways, small or debilitating, and somewhere in between. We all have reactions. And I'm not even talking, if you do your trauma work, whatever that means to you, even when you do your trauma work, you still have these small reactions over time. And depending on what your reserves are or how resilient you are at the time, they can pop up bigger or smaller, more impactful at times than others. But it's not like we erase all that stuff. I don't care how much safety you have, there's still those seeds in there that your body knows that there are things that happen to you. And yeah, I can use my resources, or I can calm myself, or I can use a friend or whatever. I can process this, but it doesn't mean that those triggers completely go away and disappear. They just don't.
Right.
It's just a part of who we are. We just learn to create safety. We learn to use our resources, and we move through life doing that.
So for me, I think I was at a place, and this was what was it, like probably April of 2023.
Yes.
Was when a good friend of mine said, "Hey, I'm going to this trauma retreat," and I had and I'm in the space, I'm in the treatment world. I've done work, I've done lots of work, and I'm continuing to do work. I've been sober since 2011, so I've continued on my path to recovery ever since, or starting at that point. And my friend says, "Hey, I'm going to this trauma retreat," and I'm like, "Okay, let's do it." And I think I was at a point where I was ready to do the work. I was ready for something like this. And I remember thinking about it, and you're in Idaho. I live in Arizona. I own a treatment center. I have helped thousands of people. I've had lots of people go through my program. So for me to go to Idaho was good for me to kind of get away, because I didn't think there would be, I wouldn't, it's good for me to go away. Was my opinion. And so I remember going out and showing up, and I literally walked through the door, and there's a guy there, and he looks at me and he says, "I went through your program." And I was like, "You got to be kidding me." I'm like, in a different part of the country. There's 6 people in our intensive. There's 6 people. And I walked through the door, and this guy says, I stayed at one of your homes in Camelback Recovery a couple years ago, which was just wild. Like, the world is so small. And at the time, the reason why he knew me is because I facilitated a Zoom 12-step meeting. I didn't work with him directly. And at the time, we didn't offer clinical services either. So my first reaction was like, oh, wow, can I even do this? And does this create a dual relationship? But all things considered, I felt like it was okay, but it was just wild that the first thing that happens is and it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because people are so afraid, that I'll see somebody, how especially professionals.
Mhm.
And it's always, I was going to say amazing, but it's miraculous to me how something bigger than you or I or anybody brings these groups together. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing.
Mhm.
And so I just always have faith, as you did in those moments, that this is the way it was
Right.
supposed to be. Yeah.
Right. It was the perfect group. And also, I mean, as it's like, there's lots of tears, lots of, I mean, getting vulnerable, so vulnerable, lots of tears, lots of crying, lots of a lot happens at one of your retreats, which is
Mhm.
just it was such a great experience. And I have more that I want to share about what happened like during the retreat, after the retreat. I left you a voice. Did you ever listen to my voice memo that I sent to you about what happened after the
Yes, I
retreat?
do. And I would love for you to share that.
Okay, so I grew up in Oxnard, California. And one of my uh,
Mhm.
one of the most traumatic things that happened, in my childhood was when I was 12 years old. My parents get divorced, which is, that's a traumatic event. And then I moved 80 miles away to a new place. I grew up in Cerritos, and then I moved to Oxnard, California, which um, was just a different, Cerritos was kind of like upper middle income. Oxnard was middle, like lower middle income.
Mhm.
And I remember moving to Oxnard and going to school there. I was in seventh grade. So seventh grade, I mean, kids are pretty terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
At 12 years, I mean, at 12 years old, like they just are. And I remember, so I was going to school at Oxnard. I went to Rio de Villa, RDV, in seventh grade, and I remember showing up with like new clothes and new things, and I look like this rich kid. I'm not a rich kid, but compared to some of the other kids there, then I kind of look like this rich kid. And the result being I'm this white kid, and it was predominantly Hispanic and lower middle income. And I just like I got in fights, I got picked on, I got bullied, I mean, it was just like it was bad. I mean, that my whole like seventh and eighth, and that was when I started my drinking, drugs. That was when I started my path to yeah, to drug use and alcohol.
Yeah, and I just want to throw this in here, Tim, just because you're demonstrating exactly a couple things. One is the safety, the lack of safety that you felt during that time, the
Mhm.
trauma.
Mhm.
And as you're describing it, it's exactly what happens. Most people wouldn't think that a regular junior high experience with some bullying isn't going to be anything out of the ordinary. That's what we all go through. But as you're talking about it, I can feel and see and know that those triggers, those things inside of you still exist. Doesn't mean you haven't resolved or that you haven't moved on or that you haven't created safety. It's those triggers that come up, and in explaining this, it's really beautiful to watch you talk about something that I know you've worked on. I've worked on with you. It's beautiful, and yet your humanness shows in this really beautiful way that you're going to tell this story. And so I just want to say, um, I just love that because that's how people connect with each other. And so, um, you know, it's not that you haven't worked on this or whatever, you're having emotions because you're human, and it's just so beautiful. And this is what trauma does. And,
Yeah.
you know, to us for a lifetime.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I didn't take away, but I just really wanted to point that out. I appreciate you sharing this. Go
Yes,
ahead.
of course, of course. And the other thing that I just thought of is actually during the retreat, I remember getting to a point where I don't remember if it was like, I think we started the evening, like we showed up one day, and then like that evening we started doing the work. And then I think mid-morning, I remember there was a point after doing a bunch of other exercises, I got to a point where I started remembering things
Mhm. Yeah.
that I just didn't remember. They were just gone. They were gone. They were memories that I started remembering and things. And I remember when I mentioned that to you, you said, okay, now we're getting into the work.
Yeah.
Which you hear a lot of people say, okay, doing the work, you got to do the work, you got to do the work, you got to do the work. That's kind of something that you hear a lot of people say, oh, you got to do the work, you got to do the work. And that was like the very first time I think I had ever really clearly understood, like, oh, now I'm doing the work. And
your body starts working for you when you're deciding I'm ready to do it, whatever it is. And
right.
so the really beautiful part of it is what you're talking about that happens is your body's like, oh, you're ready to do it. And this is a safe place. So let me give you information that you need to do the work.
Right. It's like getting to a place where the walls are down,
Safety.
completely vulnerable. I'm safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm
Yeah.
safe. I'm safe. And so we go through and we do, I think it's 2.5 days, right? 2.5 days of just hardcore work, and maybe 3 days. I don't know. I don't even remember how many days. There was a lot of stuff that you know, I learned, like I looked at some of my patterns. There are a lot of things I looked at, but let's go back to the story. So after the retreat, I went hiking in the Sawtooth Mountains with my friend Glenn, and we went hiking, and then I remember coming back into Idaho, downtown Idaho. My flight was on Wednesday. Glenn's flight was on Tuesday. So remember, one of the things that I'd worked through, one of the things I'd realized, was that traumatic period of time living in Oxnard. So Glenn and I go on this hike, Sawtooth Mountains. It's, you know, it's a 10-hour hike. It's hardcore. It's amazing. It's beautiful. And then Glenn's flight's on Tuesday, my flight's on Wednesday. So we go back into Idaho, and I remember I'm trying to find a hotel. I'm trying to book a hotel. And the first hotel, I'm like, man, this hotel's like $400. And I'm like, and Glenn's like, oh, it shouldn't be $400. And I didn't, and I finally find, and then I go to book a hotel, and that hotel, by the time I go to book it, it says, oh, this hotel is sold out. I'm like, what is going on here? So I go to this airport hotel. It's a Marriott. And Glenn drops me off. I go into this hotel, and the hotel is filled with just people, and specifically kids, specifically boys, and they look like they're probably, I don't know, 7th, 8th grade, 12 years old or so. And so I'm in Idaho. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm from Oxnard, California, Northern California. I'm across the country. I go in, I'm like, and I look around, and I see a kid with like a hat that says Oxnard on it. And I'm like, there's no there's no way. And then I go into my room, I go out to dinner, I come back from dinner. These kids and their parents, they're all like hanging out, eating eating and socializing. And, you know, a couple more of them have like the Oxnard hats, the Oxnard shirts. And I'm like, and I'm just thinking to myself, there's no way. And then I go into my room, I sleep. I wake up the next morning and they're all having breakfast and I'm going to have breakfast too. And I'm sitting down, and they all have like Oxnard hats, Oxnard shirts, Oxnard jerseys. And it turns out I start talking to them, and sure enough, these kids from Oxnard, California, they're like 7th and 8th grade. They're 12 and 13 years old. They're there for I think it was a soccer, some sort of a soccer tournament. And I was just, and I sat there, I sat there at breakfast, just eating, just like, and I just cried. It's like there are no coincidences. Everything happens exactly the way it's supposed to. And I remember talking with my friend after, and he said, well, what did you like? What happened? What did you think of the experience? What did you realize? What was your realization as a result of that encounter? And I realized they're just boys. They're just little boys.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, my experience was that these kids were so terrible, these terrible kids that were just evil and caused me so much pain and so much trauma. But then at that moment, I realized they're just little boys, and
Yeah.
they're just living life,
Yeah.
and there's no reason for me to have um I don't know, the feelings that I was having about these terrible kids from from
Yeah. Well,
Oxnard.
it's interesting, Tim, because what you were talking about and what you didn't mention is that so much of the work that we do is going back to those parts of us as younger selves, not necessarily that inner child work with that little broken one, but many ages through the years, and really revisiting, you know, those ages of ourselves. And so in our work together, we'd gone back and found those 13 year old. And so that boy was a part of you that day at that hotel in a way that it wouldn't have even affect, maybe, I mean, who knows what, but it was especially that day because you'd found that boy and he was alive and well in you from
Mhm.
the work that you've done. And so it was a reparative experience, which is what TerraVista is about, is how do we begin to lay new safety tracks, if you will,
Mhm.
that's the language I use, to begin to be safe, because in your mind, this 12-year-old was so overwhelmed by the bullying of these boys
Mhm.
that it had shaped the way that you felt about yourself, your world, and to be able to right size, if we will use that language, right size the memory, the experience, and you as being a man versus being able to um, take care of or create safety for this 12-year-old, 13-year-old that still lived in you, that believed that the world was unsafe.
Right.
In those moments, God, the universe, whatever miraculous thing happened, you were able to see in those moments that the trauma had distorted some things in your mind that made you still feel unsafe about an experience, that they were just 12-year-old boys, but in your mind, it wasn't. It was very different than that.
Right.
And so how beautiful for you to be able to say they're just boys.
Right. They're just boys,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
safe.
And I'm safe.
I'm
Absolutely.
safe. Yeah. And I think one of the exercises or the homework that you gave us was to go back to,
Yes.
you know, the place where I lived when I was a 12-year-old boy,
Yeah.
and you know, eat some of the food or the candy or the whatever, and just like get back into that environment. And I'm kind of like, I really don't need to, because that
It came to
environment
you.
came to me.
That's
Like,
right.
I don't, and it was just such a, gosh, it was so, man, I couldn't, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe that these kids from Oxnard were, you know, across the country in the same hotel. It's like, what? To get a free copy of the 12-step guide that I created for you, click on the link in the description below.
That's incredible. Yeah. I hear stories like this often, which is so amazing to me because the work just keeps on going and God or the universe just keeps on giving you what you need to continue healing as you make the decision to heal, as you make the decision to face the things that feel so incredibly frightening because the trauma makes it feel insurmountable. But the work just keeps going. As you said, I was talking to a guy the other day who said he was in New York City at a cafe, and had done the work with the boys, and some guy that was waiting on him came in or was waiting on him and came to him, and they started talking, and he had a credit card or debit card from the bank that was in that town. And they both started talking about being from that town. And then they started talking about where they lived. And then they figured out that they lived in the same house. And this boy had the same bedroom.
Wow.
Guy who'd gone through the program. And this was not, this was,
Yeah.
years and years and years later. And both of them had moved out of the house. And they struck up a friendship that was beautiful for both of them in working on the things that came from trauma.
Right. And one of the things that I remember you saying was you gave us some homework, some things to do, and you said, listen, if you don't do this work that I'm suggesting, you're still going to continue processing. Things are still going to happen. I'm going to talk to you in a year or 2 years or 3 years, and you're going to be in a different place. I guarantee it. And that's been your experience. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about doing this work, doing a type of intensive with you, is that you don't necessarily, okay, you're going to give me some things that could potentially help me, but regardless, I'm still a different person. I still have gone through and healed parts of me that wouldn't have otherwise been healed.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what's interesting about that whole thing is I didn't set out to really think that this work was going to change the course of people's lives. I started doing this work because I believed that it was going to teach self-regulation in the moment. But what happened to me was that a year, 9 months, a year later, what happened is that people came back to me and said, it changed my life. And I'm like, you being able to self-regulate is great, but it helps you in a moment. It doesn't change over a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And what I figured out is that this regulation practices and these things that I was talking about rewires the brain.
Right.
But that wasn't ever my intent going into it. My intent was, let's just teach you how to self-regulate in the moment when you're dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that over time and really learn how to create safety for these parts of you that don't feel safe, it rewires your brain. And so I didn't set out to do that. People came back to me and said, I've done this without even knowing that that's what they've done. Right. And so, I don't know that I don't know that I ever promised people that that's what happens. I just know that's what happens because that's what people tell me happens.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's, I don't think there's many ways to rewire the brain. I think there are a few that are very effective, and be it through a trauma intensive like this. There are lots of studies that support the use of psychedelics for transformation.
Mm-hmm.
People's neural pathways become more malleable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the right way to say it.
Yeah.
Whether it's ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA, there's ways for people to open up, and there's ways for people to rewire their brains.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone wants to work through, if they want to really do the work, they got to figure out, what everybody, there's lots of different ways to do it. But I would say that, and it's scary, and it can be overwhelming to think about it. But once you get through it, the other side, it's just like, it's so amazing to be on the other side of doing the work.
It's so sacred. You know, I don't use that word lightly, but the work that I do, it feels sacred to me. It feels like I'm walking in a place that not many people get to tread, and that not many people give trust in those ways to each other in the group and to me. But that in that 3 days, full days, and 2 half days, so it's really like 5 days, but
Okay.
in that period of time, we are just walking in this really sacred ground that feels so protected. And then as people just feel that safety, they're able to open up and go to those places that feel sometimes petrifying.
Mhm.
And it is it's just so beautiful, and it is a safe place. It's a safe place that I just feel incredibly honored to be a part of.
What are some of the common misconceptions people have about trauma and its impact on mental health and well-being?
Yeah, people want to discount what they've been through. People want to say, I don't know that I've really earned a seat at this table because I haven't been sexually abused. That's the big one. I haven't been sexually abused, or my parents were good parents. And the other thing is that if I get into this, then you're going to blame my parents, and they're going to be the bad people. And I don't want to do that. Um, or people are just afraid to go there. What's going to come up? Because a lot of people have that hidden trauma knowledge that's clear in the back of their mind. Most people think, man,
Right.
I think there might be something there. But what always people often will think is, what if I was sexually abused? That's like the big thing that they're afraid is going to come out. And there's other things. Obviously, I don't want to just say that. That's, it's only that, because there's just many, many things. But the fact of the matter is, we've all experienced things that have been incredibly painful. We just don't make it out of childhood without being overwhelmed by the things that happen to us as we're learning and growing. And most people that come to me don't have parents that were equipped to give them what they needed. I mean, as parents, we don't know. And oftentimes we're trying to love our children in the way that we want them to become. And oftentimes the most difficult trauma to work with is when there's a misattunement with the child's needs with what a parent sees in the child. And yet nobody would ever think that that's a trauma. But when I behave a certain way and my parents can't see that they need to mold me in a way or help me in a way to see me, but that I have to just be who they want me to be, there's a piece that's missing that says, no one's ever seen me. And that's a trauma.
Right.
And so I would say that's the most common trauma that I see, but it's such a hidden trauma that nobody would know that. And so people come and say, well, I don't have any trauma, but I just feel like something's wrong.
Mm.
And so there's just a lot of misconception about trauma and what it is. Meaning it's about overwhelm and not having the resources to deal with a thing or calm myself down. And that's impacted all of us as human beings. That's just the state of childhood often. And then if you throw in parents who don't know, for whatever, have challenges with poverty or, multiple marriages or their own substance use or addictions or whatever. I mean, it's a crapshoot how we come out.
Mhm.
And so we do not, as you know, this isn't a place where we go to dig back to find out who's to blame. This is
Right.
a place where we go back to figure out, how do I rescue those boys or girls inside of me, or those young people inside of me that don't know how to heal. And so I choose people, or believe that somehow my parents are going to save me, or that somebody's going to save me, or that somehow the world should give me all the things that I don't have. And all of that is fallacy, because it's up to us now. We're adults now. And TerraVista really is, let me give you the tools you need to rescue yourself.
Right.
Because nobody's really coming for us. But
Right.
boy, we show up for ourselves.
Right. It's, as they say, it's an inside job.
Mm-hmm.
It's always, it doesn't matter. Like, other people don't matter. What people do, what people say, their feelings about me, their feelings about the event. And I mean, even speaking to making amends, when I make an amends, it's not really for me. And I mean, I remember I used to think that, well, that person really owes me an amends. And it's like, well, I mean, the amends is for me, it's not for them. So maybe they owe me an amends. I don't know. But really, it's like, if they want to be happy, healthy, joyous, and free, like, they should probably make the amends. But if I want to be happy, joyous, and free, I need to make the amends. I need to keep my side of the street clean. The other thing I was thinking about was the 4 agreements. And in the 4 agreements, they talk about the domestication. We're all domesticated, you know, like dogs are domesticated. We're domesticated by our parents, by our siblings, by our aunts, uncles, our teachers, our coaches. And those people treat us the way that they were treated, the way that they learned.
That's
And
right.
so you talked about blaming someone, and there's really no one's to blame, because everybody is doing the very best that they can with the tools that they've been given and the way that they learned how to live.
Yeah, we're all products of our environment. And so
Right.
we drag everything that is undone into the family home. And then we're all just trying to figure out how to make it through. And so, yeah, you know, blaming our parents gets us nowhere,
Right.
because, you know, where does it start and where does it end? And yet, understanding, oh my gosh, I make sense, is such a huge aha that people go through when they're doing the work. Because when I make sense to myself, the shame factor dissipates so much. Because when I make sense, it's like, of course I did those things. I was brilliant to be
Right.
able to think about, oh, drugs makes me numbs that stuff out. And until
Right.
I have a better way to do it, numbing out is probably the best solution I have for now.
Right.
Or whatever thing we turn to. It's like that survivor in us is incredibly brilliant
Mm-hmm.
to help us get through until hopefully we figure out, I need to include others in this quest for health besides just my own, you know, leaving it to my own devices of trying to
Right.
numb, escape, get away, attached to whatever thing we do to try and figure out how to feel better.
Right. And I'm sitting here thinking about being domesticated, and we learn how to live. We're programmed. I mean, what are we, like 50% programmed by the time we're 6? And
Yes,
you know, we're like
maybe
90%
more than
programmed
that.
by the time
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah.
by the time we're 17 or 18 years old. And then so doing the work, doing this type of trauma work, or whatever it looks like, that's the
Mhm.
way to become reprogrammed, which
Yeah.
speaks to a person's behavior. So how does trauma typically affect a person's behavior, their relationships, and their overall quality of life?
Yeah. We set ourselves up for protection against the thing that happened many, many, many years ago. And so we set up barriers. We um, become boundaryless, trying to get the thing that we didn't know how to get back then. And so we create these situations where we choose people to be in our lives that will reenact that lack of safety, or that um, lack of attention, or whatever lack that is. And we invite people into our lives to reenact that with us, because we think, oh, if I, back in the back of our brain, if I just have one more chance, I'll do it differently.
Right.
Or I'll protect myself better, and so I won't let anybody in. Or I will create these relationships where I've got one that I'm letting go of, well, I've got another one, so I don't feel that sense of abandonment that I felt as a child. Or, I mean, it's unbelievable the things we do to set up our lives now with something that happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago that's not happening now, but we're continuing to set our life up as if that very thing is happening. And so then we just recreate it.
Right.
And so there's just, and then the anxiety that comes from trying to stay away from it when it's not there. But the anxiety started a long time ago and just continues to grow by the things that we choose to come in our lives, or the depression from trying to numb out or whatever. I mean, it's just a recreation or a continuation of history that isn't happening now. I mean, that original one, but we probably recreated so it feels like it's happening now.
Right.
And then we just turn over and over and over again in the dysfunction of all of it.
So they say you attract what you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so once someone does the work and they become transformed, what is the result when it comes to the people that they attract into their life, the environment that they put themselves in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's interesting because, when people are choosing people to be in their lives, one of a real common one is women will often say, I date the bad boys,
right?
Because the good guys are boring. And really what they're saying is, I invite chaos into my life because that makes me feel normal.
Right.
And so what happens is the chaos doesn't feel good anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that calming guy or woman or whatever may be somebody I would never choose before. And I can't understand because it's so totally different, but they're just calm and it makes me feel better. And I like this feeling better. So I choose somebody different because the chaos just doesn't resonate with me anymore in who I am. Right. So we choose different. What used to be doesn't feel comfortable anymore. We start rearranging our life in a way that feels safer than it ever did. And it doesn't necessarily mean physically safer, but safer in a way that my body feels calm and the people around me meet my needs, or at least I can ask for my needs to be met and they understand what I'm talking about.
Right. So when someone gets clean and sober, my experience or my recommendation is, hey, everything has to change. New eating habits, new sleeping habits, new exercise habits, you pray and meditate, new friends, new hobbies, new interests, like the environment, like everything has to change. And so I think whether someone is trying to be clean and sober, or they're just trying to live a different life that's not filled with chaos, and they become a different person and they transform, like how long does that process to creating an environment that is conducive to the way that I want to live? Like how long does that, like, what does that process look like?
That's a really great question. I don't know that I have a definite answer, but I will tell you that it takes some time for the brain to settle into a place and start rebooting in a way that says, I'm safe, that feels safe. And so much of the time in the weeks after sobriety, your brain is still so affected, that we talked about post-acute withdrawal being 18 months or so, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in between, your brain's settling. It's not a complete settling. And then you'll be going along and it'll just misfire at some point. And it'll be like, I'm back to square one. No, you're not back to square one. It's a misfiring that's happened at a time that sent you scared. But think about those times when you've been able to do things that you never have been able to do before, and the way that your brain is thinking different, and the way that you can say, I had a good day, or boring is okay, because boring before used to be the biggest trigger, but 9 months later, boring is, this is what I dreamed of doing, is doing nothing in the boring, so that I could realize how far I've come, that I don't have to cover up, numb out, get high, whatever, because my brain is settling.
Mhm.
So, the initial settling, it's going to be, I mean, that's why, we talk about a year's worth of treatment or a continuum of care for a year, because your brain's just settling during that time.
Yeah.
And you have to start realizing that we're creating safety
Right.
as well, and that the brain's not used to safety, but it longs for it, and that it takes time to rewire into safety.
Right. I remember I took when I was probably a couple years sober, I took a mindfulness-based stress reduction class, or was it? Yeah, mindfulness-based stress reduction. I think that was the name of the class. It was with a guy named Paul Sugar, who's at the Franciscan Renewal Center. And I remember one of the things he said is, you got to be okay. You got to learn to be okay with being bored.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the addict that's before he gets clean and sober, like I thrive on chaos. Like I want, and I think there are a lot of people today that thrive on chaos. They think they need to be in chaos. That's why they wake up, they look at their phone, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. They're like, they're longing for more likes. They're longing for chaos essentially.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
can't
They're
ever just
longing.
like sit.
Yeah, we live in a state of longing, and we're programming our brains more and more and more to have quicker clips of stimulation over and over and over and over and over again, instead of moving into this place of, just calm. And so it's just gonna speed up and speed up. It's and we're getting addicted to other things, including, the regular things. But I think about what we're doing with our phones and social media, and how we're programming our brains in that way, differently than we ever have, but very much, just as addictive. And it scares me. It scares me, and I hear people talk all the time about how scary it is, and yet we just do it over and over and over and over and over.
Mhm. Well, that's what's comfortable. That's what we know.
Yeah, it's what we know. It's how we escape, and the world's a scary place right now.
What are some signs or symptoms that might indicate someone is dealing with hidden trauma?
Relationship issues that I don't seem to be resolvable. Um, Choosing the same kind of person over and over again in your life, and not understanding why I choose unavailable people all the time, or whatever the pattern might be. Depression, anxiety. I, I'm longing for something, and I don't know what that is. I've gone to all kinds of trying to resolve what's happening, and whatever that is, and I can't get to the root of it, or I don't know. I go to therapists, I go to these retreats. I've tried this, I've tried that, whatever. It's not in an answer outside of you, it's an answer inside of you. And until we really begin to understand that, we can chase after everything, anything. And so, when we have that disruption inside of ourselves, sometimes it's just, I don't feel okay, but I don't know what the problem is. That's enough to say there's stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
So, it can be, substance use, it can be anxiety, it can be depression, or it can just be a thing of, I'm not feeling right. And even feeling right, feeling like I just want to do more work. I just want to understand myself. I just want to see myself. I just am curious about who I am. That's a call to do your work. It doesn't have to be something's terribly wrong. Most people, it's a sign of something's terribly wrong, I need to do work. But we all could benefit.
Yep.
We all could benefit. I long to go through TerraVista. I want to do the work just because it's so beautiful and sacred. And it's like we long for those understandings of ourselves and connection to ourselves. So it doesn't necessarily mean something has to be wrong, but just a desire to see myself and show up for myself, is what's required.
Yep. A desire to grow, a desire to develop, a desire to transform, a desire to just continue digging.
Yeah, connecting with myself and others.
Yeah, and it's like they say you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so thinking that I need to know that I have an issue that I need to work through, it's like, no.
Yeah.
you know, if you have the desire to know what you don't know, then doing some type of work could be very beneficial.
Right.
So we're kind of coming up to the end of our time. There's a couple of other questions I have. So so for someone listening who suspects they might have some trauma that needs to be resolved, whether it's hidden or not hidden, what steps would you recommend they take to start their healing journey?
Yeah. Um, we have a web page, 𝐿𝐴RaHolbrook.com. I would go to the web page. There's a number on there for Lisa, or you can do an inquiry. Lisa, my assistant, picks those up every day. I think that probably would be the best way to start the process. I don't have Lisa's number. Maybe you could put that on there.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Okay, if you'll put that in the show notes, that would be great, because they can just get a hold of Lisa, and she can give them dates, and give them all the information that they would need.
Is there a question that I should have asked that I didn't ask?
No, I think, I had some little notes here, and as you were going through which one, I'm like, check, check, check. You really did cover everything that I think is important. I really do want to emphasize that trauma is a response rather than an event. It comes from a trauma event, absolutely, or events. But I think people really need to be assured that we all have work to do. And it doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong with me, or something happened to me that had to be so big that I've got to qualify to do the work. We all get to do the work. We're all worth doing the work. And it's one of the most beautiful gifts you can give yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, I loved it. And the other thing, I have a couple other notes here. There's some things we went through, a bunch of exercises. So I just wanted to share this. I walked away with the retreat with my trigger words.
Yes.
And which was amazing. And I just realized, so my 3 trigger words: I'm humiliated, I'm lonely, and I'm furious. And so I think about my life, and I think about the things that happened. And for example, when I was in college, I worked with a company called Student Works Painting. I learned how to run a house painting business over the summer, and I ended up getting fired due to my alcoholism and drug addiction. And I was with this company for gosh, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years. I mean, like it was what I did. It was like my whole world centered around this company. I was a district manager, then I was a general manager. I learned how to be a professional. I learned how to work hard. I made great money, but so speaking to my trigger words, I'm fired, so I'm humiliated, and then I'm lonely because
Absolutely.
everything is gone. My whole world is ripped away from me. And then I'm furious. My being furious doesn't necessarily come out as I'm furious. It doesn't come out as I'm angry. What it does is that's my motivator to go work hard and make something happen. So I bounce back and I do something. I'm on to my next thing. And that happened multiple times in my life. I'm fired, I'm humiliated, I'm lonely, I'm furious, and the anger comes out as me being motivated, and I'm on to my next thing. So what's your explanation of, because that anger is what I used. It's like, maybe if I wasn't so angry, I wouldn't have gone on to do the next great thing.
Right. It's interesting because those triggers teach us about ourselves. And in anger is a beautiful thing. We've really created this idea of anger as something horrible and we shouldn't have it. But the pure essence of anger is a motivator, big time motivator. That's what anger's for. And so, you can use, what happens is, let me just explain the process. We find these trigger words by exploring the trauma. And so, as you well know, we went back and looked at those traumas and said, what were the feelings that I carry from this?
Right.
And we find out what those triggers are. And those triggers are today's trigger words. Not,
Yep.
I mean, yes, they go back, but they're today's trigger words. And so what you're describing is what the hidden trauma is, because we carry our triggers from that trauma from years ago in every situation we're in today. And so you just get to see, like, from that beautiful example of how we just keep recycling the trauma until we understand, oh my gosh, this is the trauma that lives inside of me hidden. And I reenact it in these ways, but I can use my trauma in not just healing for myself, but for motivation to help others, to be able to use these feelings in a way that are helpful to me instead of me being stuck in the harm of them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Love it.
Yeah, I love it too.
Well, we're at the end of the hour, or at the end of 75 minutes or whatever it is. And Terra, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I really enjoyed this. I think it helped me continue processing some of my own trauma, which is it's great. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel a lot better than I did at the beginning of the hour. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I've loved this time together. It's so good to see you again.
Likewise. Your expertise and insights with us today were so valuable. And hidden trauma is a topic that affects so many people, often without them realizing it. And your work at TerraVista Retreats is truly making a difference in helping individuals uncover and heal from these deep-seated wounds. For those of you listening, if you want to learn more about Terra's work or explore the healing environment of TerraVista Retreats, be sure to visit her website at terraholbrook.com, or there's going to be a phone number in the show notes. And remember, healing is a journey, and there's always hope for recovery and transformation. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and keep moving forward on your path to wellness and recovery. If you got value from this video, if you heard what you needed to hear, be sure to like it. Comment if you've got a question or you have something to say. Subscribe to the channel. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism, whatever it may be. So if you or a loved one is struggling and you need some guidance and you need some direction, reach out to us. Our contact information is down below, or you can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, whether it be detox, inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services, whatever it may be. Like I said, we can either help you or make sure that you get sent in the right direction. We help people all over the country, all over the world for that matter. I'll see you on the next video.